Today I want to do compositing with an interactive light effect. I have here a clip of this flickering fire and want to composite this chair into this clip, and I want the light of the fire to correctly light the chair. So I need to do some color corrections, some modifications, but those need to change over time as the fire changes. So I need some automated way to drive a color correction, and this is what I want to do today. I will first show you how you can do this with color matching options in the color corrector and in the curves tool, and then do a variation of this where I have a bit more control using the probe modifier. Automated color correction, let's get started. If you want to follow along with me, you find a link to a tutorial package on my website in the description, and there you get both the media file to play along and also my DaVinci Resolve project with the solution as I'm showing it now in this tutorial. So grab the files if you want to follow along. And just a quick explanation of my setup here. I have the chair here already rotoscope, so it's a basic rotor and a little bit of keying to extract this from an image which looked like this. So that's my chair. Rotor is not the topic, so I have done it for you. You can just grab it from here. And I have the fireplace here. And the fireplace already has a bit of background, and I'm placing the chair like in the middle between the background and the fire. So I had to extract the fire, and this is my simple Luma key here. I rotoed out, I masked out here the stems, the darker areas, and then used a Luma key to get the flames. Now this is not the perfect key of all times. I'm not getting like these very light smoke areas here, which is super difficult to grab because you have a light background and then the smoke on top. So I'm kind of ignoring this, but for this tutorial this should be good enough. And I have the fire, that's most important, in front of the chair and the background behind. But of course the color of the chair isn't matching at all, so that's where I start now with the tutorial for the color correction. First step, I try automated matching with the color corrector tool. So let me, after the chair image here, let me bring in a color corrector. And let me open the inspector. And here in the color corrector, I can use the histogram option. And if you use the histogram option, there is an option to do matching. So keeping just shows the histogram, equalize tries to balance things out over the different color ranges, brightness ranges, and match is where you can do foreground, background matching. Now, what does it match to? Well, here is a foreground reference input, and this reference is only used for the matching. So I'm using my fireplace as reference, and now what happens is that I get two histograms overlapped, so I'm seeing the one both from the fireplace and from the chair, and now the match function tries to bring these closer together. So let me quickly explain how these work. So histogram in general you're probably familiar with, but the idea is, it's very common in photography, right? The idea is that for each, in this case, brightness value from black to white, you get an indication of how many pixels fall into that range. So it's giving you like an aggregate view, how much do you have in the dark ranges, how much in the bright. I can go with the mouse in here and zoom in, so the images here are very dark overall, right? Overall most of it is black, and right now I am looking at my at the image that is to be corrected at the chair, and even before the color correction works. So this is was the input, but the chair is relatively dark. Well, it's blue, but then most of this image is transparent. Of the chair image is also transparent. Most of it is transparent. So there's a big spike at 0, and then fewer values at higher code values of the color. If I bring in the second image, you see a second curve here. This is now from the fireplace, again a very dark image, but you see because of the fire it goes further into the bright areas, And then if I match, it's trying to match these, but it can match in different ways. So here I am looking at the luminance, and I am not matching luminance right now. I'm matching the RGB channels by default. And you can look here into the different red channels. So this is the red curve before the red curve of my background image. And if I turn on the output histogram, this is the histogram it comes up with. So it's trying to, let me turn off some stuff. So it's going from this curve, it's trying to modify this to get closer to this curve, and the result is this one. So this is what the sampling and automatic adjustment gave us here. And to get this result, it performed this curve of color correction. So this is basically a curve, as you can see in the curves editor, in the curves tool. So this curve is being applied to the red channel to match these two. Same you can see in the green and in the blue channel. Let me go back to the overview. You can alternatively also match luminance, or you can combine the two. So here I'm only doing RGB. I'm only matching the colors irrespective of luminance. If you do a match luminance, it's trying to match the luminance curve separately. And do we see anything? Sorry, I have the whole thing turned off. I should obviously turn it on again. So this was only the RGB. And now if I do luminance matching, you see there's a different luminance curve here coming into it. And you see it's now first trying to match the luminance, and thereby the whole image looks slightly different. I think the RGB match looks a bit better to me. It seems like if doing the luminance first, then the color matching also changes the tone a little bit, but you can experiment with this. There's a smooth correction here, and that means that it's trying to smooth out the output histogram. So sometimes you're getting, due to the curves, it's possible that you're getting too harsh results, and if you smooth this out, you see it's trying to smooth this curve and smooth the histogram, and now you see some effect everywhere because I'm no longer at 0. I should definitely click pre-divide, post, multiply. I should always do that if I have an alpha channel, but before it didn't really come into picture. Now it's coming into picture because it's lifting the black values up. If you want to get more familiar with how to read these curves, how to use these curves, how to use them in compositing, last week I did a pretty extensive tutorial on how I use the curves tool in compositing, and the principle here is basically the same. But even if you don't understand and just say, okay, this is dark, this is bright, you can do the automated matching this way. Let me go back to RGB. You can unlock here, do them separately. The smooth curve, again, sometimes it helps, but in this case, it's also lifting up, which doesn't seem so good in this case. So I might turn this off. Now, this is the automated way, and the great thing with this is it is taking this frame by frame. So my color correction here is directly automated. So here I have the result in full screen. The chair is, as you can see, animated by the color of the fire in the foreground. So I have this interactive element. Now I'm not done with the color correction here. Obviously, I think the chair looks too dark in some areas and almost like it's glowing outside. I don't like this, and I would definitely have to refine this further. But I might do this in a different technique that I want to show you next. And this is like the most automatic one-click kind of thing, and as you know, automatic not always works. So let me show you what I can do if I want to have a bit more control. Before I go there, I quickly want to show you one related functionality if I don't use the color corrector, but if I use the curves tool that I used also in last week's tutorial a lot. Let me bring this in and directly drop it here in on the color corrector and replace it. So I just replaced the color corrector with the curves tool and disable the alpha probably. And now I have here also a reference option, which is again using the reference image. By the way, you can choose where to take the reference. So you have this a center option here. I didn't show it to you in the color tools, but either way it's the same way. So you can choose which part of the chair should be be used for reference. So this one here would be for the foreground. And if you want to take not the whole background image as reference, but let's say only the flames or only one part of it, what I would do is I would just, the easiest way I think is just to put a transform node in here and then change the background. Like let's say I want to zoom in and I only want to use part as reference. So I only want this as the reference. I can just quickly scale it up, and now this is the input for my reference image. So just a quick tip. Now back to the curves tool, I have the reference here as well. Now the thing is here with the curves tool, I do have this match button, but it does not match over time. So this is a static match. Even if you go here to animate it, you can go to animated color correct. And then let's say on frame 30, I can click on match, and it is now matching the curves. So it's pretty much the same thing, but I don't see the histogram. I directly see the correction curves that I used to do the matching. So the matching process is pretty much the same as in the color corrector. I just don't see the histogram. I see directly the curves. And here below I see a number of samples. So I see lots of points here in the curves. Or if you go into the spline editor, you see it here. Not the color change, sorry, red, green, blue. So you see it here. And it might make sense to, in some cases, it might make sense to reduce them if you plan on doing any manual adjustments. So maybe you just reduce it to, let's say, 12 or so. And then you see, oh, okay, you have a few points, and you could, theoretically, you could go in there and do manual adjustments. So that's the good thing about this curves match. The downside is this is, now even if it's animated here, it doesn't animate this automatically. And so I see here a keyframe at 30. In principle, I could go to another frame and match again and get a slightly different match curve and so on. But you know, I would have to click through every frame, so that doesn't sound very convenient. I don't think there's a way to directly automate this to match every single frame. So this is more like a static thing. You can do this for if you don't have animation, you want to get an initial curve and then perhaps adjust that curve, what you couldn't do in the color corrector. So that's a good thing about this match functionality in the curve. Let me go back to the part where I want to animate this, and let me think about how I would do it if I had to do it completely manually, and thereby lay out my process step by step, and then I can see how I bring a clever automation into a more, let's say, guided process rather than a match at once process. So let me remove this and add, I will start just very simple with the brightness and contrast. You can use the curves tool or color corrector tool, whatever you like. But if I first look at that scene, I might say, okay, overall it's a night image, so it should be much, much darker, right? Especially these really bright highlights here, and the white edge around the chair doesn't make sense. So let me bring the white point or the gain really down and make this really dark. And at the same time, I might say, okay, perhaps the inner parts, there should still be some contrast. So maybe I want to bring the gamma up. So I'm kind of, it's a bit like reducing the contrast. So bringing the highlights down, but still seeing some of the midtones. In Curves tool, I could probably do that even much more with finer adjustments, but I think this is enough. So this way I'm reducing the overall brightness and bringing this into the night scene. At the same time, I see that everything here is like grayish, desaturated. That's not only because of the ash, but also because during night we perceive luminance better than the saturation. So everything appears a bit desaturated, and let's take care of that as well in the image. So let me desaturate this a bit, but this way I still have a bit of the blue chair. So ignoring the fire for a second, I might say this could be my starting point to put this chair into a night scene. Now, thinking about the fire, I might say, okay, I want to add this fire on top of the chair. So I could do this with a color corrector and add a tint, for example, like this. You could also do it by superimposing a new background onto this chair. That's also an option. So I think this is self-explanatory more or less. So if I have this tint, now I can try to animate this color corrector. Let me show you a slightly different method. Instead of a tint, I will merge over a background. And let's do this maybe side by side for a second. And the background obviously shouldn't be black, but I will start by sampling the fire color. So sampling something like bright yellow, orange, something like this. And I don't want to merge it over, but I want to screen it probably, and I can bring the blend down, something like this. And so that I still, with the screen, still see more of the features here. Or actually, let me keep the blend up for a second and instead bring the brightness down here. So if this goes into the level of where we are with the chair, so if I bring this, make this darker, then I'm getting into a range where the screen brightens up certain areas of the chair, but not others. So that you can experiment with different modes. So normal would just paste it on top, right? Screen is bringing the highlights through. So that's what I want to achieve here. It's like the opposite of multiply. Multiply makes everything darker. Screen makes everything brighter, except for the white point. So if I bring this into the right range, I kind of get like orange reddish highlights through the chair. I should mask this off, so let me add a bitmap node to get a mask out of my original image. So I will take this, or this, doesn't matter, my original image, which has the mask in the alpha channel. So the bitmap converts this into a mask, which I can use now to mask off my merge or my background, doesn't matter at all. So this way or this way, whatever you like. Now I'm merging this off. I have my superimposed background and can now adjust this in. I can play further here with the darkness, bring this even further down. I can play with the blend and gain parameters here. The blend and gain will do the same thing in this case, I think. But I can blend this in and can use something like this now for my fire. Now, how do I animate this now? Two options. One option, right now I have a static background, right? One option could be to actually replace this background with a representative part of the original image. Could work. So what I would do if I wanted to do this, I would probably take my original fireplace, maybe transform out some part, like focus on the actual flame, something like this, just by zooming, focus on the flame, something like this, and then maybe put some really intense blur on it. And here I probably, I don't know, maybe 500 or, you know, something really, really large. Yeah. So you see what I'm getting here? I'm getting like super blurred flames, and these are by default animated, right? So I have some really animated background. And I could use this instead of the background here. So instead of my artificial background, I could attach this. And now I have by default a kind of animated color correction. This blur can be a bit tricky, especially you need to know what you sample and how far and so on. So maybe that's not the most elegant way. That's why I want to show you another way. That will be my final method that I want to do here. And that is by probing the original image. So for this scenario, let me go one step back, disconnect again the blur. Again, this can be a bit tricky. Let me show the next option by connecting the background again, and now I want to animate this blend parameter. So, but not manually, of course, I could do like this, right? But I want to get a value for the blend parameter based on the luminance of this background image. And that is what the probe modifier can do. So I can right click on blend, say modify with probe, here, modify with probe. And a modifier is kind of a tool that drives one parameter of another tool. So in this case, I have the blend parameter, which is now animated. You see this dot here. This means this parameter I no longer set here. I can't even change it here. Instead, it comes from a different place, and the different place is here the modifier, the probe modifier, and this needs an image to probe, which I want to use the fireplace. So I can drag in the fireplace here. And then it needs a channel. You can use any one, but luminance sounds good to me. And then here is a probe rectangle if you want. And this decides where on this, let me bring in the original image as well. You decide in your modifier where you are probing. So you have here a rectangle which you can position, and I'm looking on the left image, which I can position and resize. And I might adjust it to capture like the flames up here. And now it is calculating the average luminance over this area. It's probing this, it's calculating this, and giving me an output value based on the average luminance here. And this output value is now driving in the tools section here my blend parameter. So now you see my blend parameter is changing, and by this my background color correction or my screen version here is changing. You can do the same thing with a color corrector or with the brightness and contrast, so you can always connect your probe to either a blend parameter or a gain or a gamma correction, or even, you know, if I used that color corrector here, I could connect it to the strength of a tint or so. I could get something pretty similar. I just wanted to show you this for variation, and here of course I could do further refinements. For example, I could decide to add some noise here. So instead of using the original flames in order to get like a bit of a sparkling changing effect, I could maybe use some fast noise here, and let me bring this a bit up to make it more obvious. So just to show it, you know, I could kind of match a texture which is giving this fire effect or fire brightness effect. So I could use a texture like this, perhaps even animate it over time. And now due to the blend, it's like getting stronger and weaker. Now it's too strong right now, but you know, I have the animation in time, and at the same time I might have some spatial fluctuation. I might also tune this in a little bit to affect only the upper area of the chair and not the legs here, because, you know, down here I don't see like fire effects on the ground, but I see them here on the back wall. So I would assume I should see them here in this area. And then you can start, if you really want to do a lot, you can think if the left side of the chair should be more affected than the right side and that kind of stuff. Okay, play around with this, see what you can come up with. This is my final result. If you like it, let me know in the comments, let me know your questions and what you want to see next. And of course, don't forget, you know, I don't have to say it. Okay, thanks for watching. My name is Bernd. See you next time.